In this video, I'm going to walk through the process of creating Javadoc style comments and then generating the Javadoc with the Eclipse provided tool. There is a great guide from Oracle about Javadoc style comments. Now this goes into a lot more detail than you'll be required to use for this class, but it's actually a really easy to use guide, and it comes with some great examples of preferred structure and structures to avoid when writing your comments, and it gives some great examples. So I encourage you to look through this guide. The overall purpose of Javadoc is to create a description of your class so that someone else can use that class to accomplish a task. You actually use Javadoc comments all the time when you use the Java API. So this is an example of a Javadoc style page that is generated. And actually the page we're going to generate for our class is going to look like this, only describe the class that we'll use. So anytime you go to the Java API page and you look up a class and you look up the methods that it has, or you click on a method to read a description of that method, you're using the Javadoc style comments that were created by the person who created this class. So let's create Javadoc style comments for the course class that we created in week 1. So Javadoc style comments start with a slash and double star, and you'll notice that in Eclipse, Javadoc style comments are listed in blue as opposed to just regular Java comments that are listed in green. So Eclipse gives you that nice little color coding so you can keep track of what's an official Javadoc style comment. So again, Javadoc style comments start with that slash star star and then end with the star slash. And then within that block, there are various tags you can include as well as descriptive statements. You should have a Javadoc style comment block around each block of code that is public. So essentially around your whole class and then around each public method, including the constructor. So around each one of those blocks, you should have a descriptive sentence. So for our whole class, we're going to describe the course class. So this is a, we'll say represents a college level course with limited enrollment, for example. So you want to provide just a concise but descriptive summary of, in this case, the class, or in another case, the method. And then you add whatever tags are appropriate. So Eclipse helps you by suggesting appropriate tags. For the class, the main tag you want to include is author, followed by your name. And I'm going to put in my full name with proper spacing. Another tag that you'll often see in the course, or I'm sorry, in the class block is version, if this was, you had different versions of your class that you'd written, for example. But I'm going to leave mine with just the author tag. So again, you want a descriptive statement followed by a period, and then whatever tags are appropriate. In our case, for the class, it's going to be the author tag. You also use this tense, represents, in your descriptive sentences. So this, you might think about it, you would say it as this class represents a college level course with limited enrollment. Okay, so that's more convention rather than this. This wouldn't be the proper tense from a convention standpoint. I'm not really worried about that for the Javadoc style comments you'll write for our class, but I just mentioned that for those of you who want to make sure your comments follow convention right from the get-go. Just pay attention to things like tense and capitalization and things like that. Okay, so I'm going to start with my next public method, which is the constructor. And you'll see that Eclipse suggested 2 tags for me to param tag. So the param tag is a tag you use to describe any parameter that's sent into your method. So you're going to have one param tag for each parameter. After the param tag, you put the name of the parameter. And then after that, you put a description of that parameter. Now, sometimes the description is going to be pretty similar to the parameter name, like for course name, my description is going to be the name of the course. There's not really more information I can give about that parameter. But whenever possible, you want to avoid just completely rephrasing the name of the parameter if there is kind of better phrasing or more information you can give. So instead of just saying max enrollment is the name of my parameter and that is the max enrollment, which really isn't any additional information, I'm going to maybe say that my description of that parameter is excuse me, the maximum number of students that can enroll in the course. Okay, so whenever you can be more descriptive, you want to do that. And then I'm going to include my summarizing statement. So this creates an object described by the name and the maximum enrollment. If I had a second constructor, perhaps that took a default value, I would want to include that description of that default value in my summary statement. So I might want to say, if this was a one parameter constructor that just took in the name, I would say creates an object described by the name and with the default value for the maximum enrollment, for example. Okay, so next I have my enroll students method, and here Eclipse has suggested to me a param tag and a return tag. So anytime you have a parameter, you want to have a param tag, and anytime you have a valued return type, so a return type that isn't void, you want to have an @return tag. Notice, of course, we did not have an @return tag for the constructor because constructors have no return type. But this method has a Boolean return type, so I want to have an @return tag. So for my parameter tag, I follow that by the name of my parameter, and then I put a little description. So this is the student to be added to the course. And then I want to describe what the method returns. Now, I want to provide something that's descriptive and will help explain this method to someone who might use it. So a bad description would be true or false. Well, of course it returns true or false because it's a Boolean method, so that's not really helpful. Another not great description might be true if the student is enrolled. Well, that's better than true or false, but it also just doesn't give much more information than the user can probably figure out by just looking at the name of the method. So I want to try to give a little bit more information about what's actually going on here. So in my method, I've said that if the number enrolled is less than the max enrollment, then I'm going to go ahead and add the student to the class. That will be enrolling the student. And then I return true. So I'm going to describe that in my @return tag. So I'm going to say it returns true if there is room for the student and the student is successfully added, and false otherwise. Okay. Now, a different enroll student method might check something else. It might check also that the student has paid their tuition. If that was the case, I'd want to say returns true if there's room, if the student is all paid up, and if the student is successfully added, and false otherwise. So you want to give a basic description of what's going on inside the method. Now note again, what I didn't do is just repeat my code. So I did not say true if number enrolled is less than max enrollment. You don't want your comment to repeat the code. You want it to explain it. Okay, so that's kind of a subtle distinction and it takes some practice, but you want this comment to be more English and less repetition of the code. Okay, so more how you would describe your method in words if someone asked you about it, as opposed to just doing a verbal description of the code line by line. Okay, so then in my summary statement, I'm going to say adds a student to the class if there is room, and updates the number of students enrolled. Sorry, to the course. Okay. Okay, is student enrolled? So the parameter is the student who might be enrolled, and it returns true if the student is enrolled and false otherwise. Now note again that I did not say true if the array list contains the student, because someone trying to understand this method, they don't care if I'm using an array list to keep track of my roster, or if I'm using a regular array, or if I'm using some other kind of list. They don't care about that. They just want to know, hey, what does this method do, and what kind of values does it return in what circumstances? So you want to strike a balance between describing what happens inside the method, but not talking about those implementation details that really aren't important to someone who just wants to understand what the method does, not necessarily how you wrote the method. Again, this kind of takes practice to get into the habit, to get kind of into the style of these comments. So my description for this method might be determines whether a student is enrolled in this course. Sorry, and you do also always want to say this course when you are talking about the current course. That's just another little convention thing that I often make a mistake on. Okay, so then we've got drop student. My summary might be removes a student from this course and updates the number enrolled. So my parameter is the student to be dropped, and we return true if the student was enrolled and successfully dropped, and false otherwise. Okay, print roster does not have it's void, so we don't have an at return tag, and there are no parameters. We don't have an at param tag, so we're just going to have a description here. So this prints, actually what it first does is it sorts the student roster and prints the student information to the console. Now, the comments for getters and setters are pretty much as boring as the getters and setters themselves. So this retrieves the name of the course, return the course name. This updates the name of the course, param the new name of the course. This retrieves the number of students enrolled in the course, return the number enrolled. Retrieves the maximum number of students that the course allows, return the maximum enrollment. Now for this setter, I do want to include in my description that I have some validity checks in here because I want the user to know that. So this updates the maximum number of students allowed in the course if that value is 1 or greater. Or I could say if that value is positive. So the parameter is max enrollment, the new maximum number of students allowed in the course. So if you do have any validity checking inside of a setter, it's a good idea to put that inside your description so that someone using this method is sure to know that you're going to be checking for that characteristic of the parameter. Here, this will retrieve a list of enrolled students, or of students enrolled in this class, and we return an array list of enrolled students. And then here we retrieve a text representation of this course, and my return is the text representation, which includes the name, number of students enrolled, and the maximum enrollment. Okay, so there are my Javadoc style comments. So you can see that this would be helpful to someone coming in to use your class to be able to understand what the methods are. But you might be thinking, well, if someone is looking at my class, can't they just look at the actual method itself? And yes, of course, they could look at the actual code. But the point here is that you wouldn't necessarily give someone your actual course.java file. What you'd give them instead is just the API for your course, which just includes the description of how they can use that class. So to generate that in Eclipse, what we can do is we can select the name of the class and then right click and export Javadoc. Now, if this is the first time you're using it, you might need to click configure and browse to where your Javadoc application is. It'll be in your JDK folder. And then you select where you want your output to go. And yep, it's going to generate it. Takes a little bit, and there'll be some output here as it does so. Going to pause this while it's working. It does take sometimes a minute to generate the documentation. Okay, there we go. So it generated my documentation, and here I can open up course, and you'll see here is my API for course. You can see my description of my class, all of my methods listed with the return type. If I click on any method, I jump to it, it gives me the description of the method, it gives me the description of the parameter, a description of the return type. So anyone that wanted to use my class could use this API just like you usually use the API for the Java provided classes, and you could find out all about someone's class, the methods that are provided, and the return type and parameters of those methods. Okay, so that's a general walkthrough of creating Javadoc style comments and then generating the Javadoc using Eclipse.